you very much, Jeff and Karen and Olga, for this invitation. Let me just share my screen with you. Let me know. Here we go. Can you guys see my screen?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, great. So I am Katia Vladimirova. I am a senior researcher at the University of Geneva. And as Jeff has mentioned, I have I created a network that has grown, and I am part of it, but it's living a life of its own, the Sustainable Fashion Consumption Network. And when initially I received an invitation from Jeffrey and Karen to take part in this, discussion of plastics in fashion, I thought it would be a really great opportunity to bring in researchers and academics working on the plastics elements in our consumption agenda in the fashion consumption field. And myself, however, I really wanted to share some insights with you. However, plastics is not my primary area of interest. So my job today would be to introduce, to give you a context, a background of why are we even speaking about plastics in relation to fashion. You may be thinking about, plastic sunglasses, or maybe some plastic bags, or more, stylish items that are kind of rigid. However, plastics are now really entrenched in fiber production, and we see plastics in almost every in majority of fashion items that are produced today. So let me start with a very brief short history of the man-made synthetic fibers. On October 27th, DuPont has proudly announced the creation of the first fully man-made synthetic fiber. And this was one of the first initial fibers that would then later branch out into different types. I will speak about those in just a second. However, the first biggest market for synthetic fibers was a substitution of silk stockings, though stockings for women. This was a huge revolution in the 1940s, 1949, after the war, and the markets and societies, economies were recovering. Nylon stockings became a huge hit because they wouldn't tear as much. They were much less fragile. They were easy to wash, and women absolutely loved them. Meanwhile, other types of synthetic fibers started evolving, and now, everything from stockings and undergarments to outwear started to include elements of synthetic fibers. And it brought with it, surprisingly, the democratizing of fashion to some extent, because it liberated housewives from unwanted household chores, such as ironing, because synthetic fibers were either wrinkle-free or really improved the performance, the looks of fabrics, because they had less wrinkles. So this liberation from ironing, and also easy to wash in a washing machine. It's unsurprising that in the 50s, I think between 1950 and 1956, there was the statistics that the sales of washing machines in the US have tripled. And that has to do also with the fact that synthetic fibers have found their way to people's wardrobes, to people's clothes. And it's been growing and growing since the 1950s, the use of synthetic fibers. And in the early 2000s, another very visible trend started to emerge. They were always, synthetic fibers were always mixed with natural fibers or cellulose-based fibers. However, in the 2000s, with the rise of fast fashion, we see a very, very clear trend of trying to cut down costs by shifting to synthetic fiber production and mixing fabrics. So it is cheaper to mix in for better performance, but also for cost efficiency, to mix in polyester with cotton, for example, and that would produce a cheaper fabric, especially now that the price of polyester has been dropping quite drastically. In terms of types of synthetic fibers, the most sort of well-known and up in the air in terms of discussion are polyester, acrylic, nylon, and spandex. Spandex is also known as elastan. Today, it's estimated that polyester fabrics represents about over a half of the global global fiber market. So there is more than half of the fibers that are produced are polyester fibers. And you can see polyester everywhere. I will walk through the different categories of goods that are made out of these different types. Acrylic, your sweaters, nylon, anything from sportswear, anything that needs to be tight, stay tight, or also be waterproof and water resistant. Spandex is something that adds elasticity, and very often we see spandex mixed in with other fibers to add more flexibility, elasticity to the garment. This is one of my favorite graphs recently. My source of kind of that grounds me, source of grounding me. This graph shows us the demand for different types of fabrics over the past, since 1940, so over the past century, basically 80 years. We can see how there is pretty much a steady growth and then a stagnation in demand for cotton. Some increase in demand for cellulosic fibers like the viscose or more recent generations of viscose. Demand for wool remains pretty much steady. However, what we see in blue is the line for synthetic fibers. And if you notice, there is this point in time when synthetics and cotton were used half-half at the same amount globally. And then after 1995, we see this skyrocketing demand for synthetics. This increase coincides with two other trends. The first other trend is the growth in fast fashion. So fast fashion model, this is when it picked up, early 2000s, this is when clothes started to be produced. There's more and more clothes being produced, and fast fashion thrives on synthetic fabrics. Fast fashion is, within fast fashion, it is possible to have low prices to a big extent, thanks to synthetic fibers that are cheap, that are inexpensive. And the second trend that this increase coincides with is, of course, the increased demand for fossil fuels, because synthetic fibers are essentially petroleum-based. The original synthetic fiber was made, I really love this description, it's made out of coal, water, and air. So it's a dream come true now. Now it is more synthetic fibers are made out of petroleum. And we see that today they are dominating, they're really dominating the market of fibers, and we can find them pretty much everywhere. And I wanted to talk to you about the different kinds of use of synthetic fibers. Of course, we have certain areas where the use of synthetics is very much welcome. I've recently been reading a book about the golden thread, about different types of fabric and how they changed history. And there was a really interesting chapter about the Everest, conquering Everest, and how for many decades the daredevils were trying to conquer Everest wearing woolen undergarments, which got all soaking wet from sweat, and then the sweat actually froze off on people's bodies, preventing them from performing their best. And for the first time, people were able to reach Everest. That happened when synthetic fabrics were introduced to use as inner layers. So there are definitely some types of some activities that humans perform where fabrics really matter, and we are really better off, and we really need, for example, we need rain protection when we hike, we need water protection when we snowboard, do some sports like this poor guy who ran a marathon apparently. We need lighter fabrics, we need fabrics that dry quicker, cycling, running, you name it. I also added here, of course, the famous Patagonia advertisement, "Don't buy this jacket," which is an acknowledgement of the fact that indeed in sportswear, in outwear, athleisure products, we sometimes we cannot avoid buying new, but if we can, we really need to think twice about it. And Patagonia is well known for using synthetic fibers for their outwear products, but they're very much aware of this, and they are aware that there is a need to maintain these garments in use as long as possible through repair, resale, etc., etc. And of course, I just thought it would be appropriate to mention it here as one of the better examples of how the brands can accept and work on improving the use of synthetic fibers that they work with. However, there are other types and much more plentiful, categories of fashion products that include synthetics. Latest updates, so hurry if you can. Boohoo, today there is a sale on this particular top, 75% off for £3.30. You can buy this. It's part of the basics collection, and you can see here it's made this top that feels, and well, it looks like cotton, feels like cotton. Many of the garments that we use closer to bodies, most people report that they prefer to have something made out of cotton, of soft fabrics. So these fabrics that feel soft, that feel good close to the body, right now, many of them are being substituted by polyester, elastane, 100% polyester, or polycotton mixes. So in product categories where this is absolutely not necessary, and there are other materials that are available for the purpose of reducing costs. Another example is this sweater. Many people are used to having sweaters made out of wool. Historically, sweaters were made out of wool or cotton yarn. Today, if we look at the majority of sweaters that are jumpers, cardigans, any sort of knitwear that are sold by fast fashion brands, those would be a mix of acrylic polyester and cotton, or acrylic polyester, different melange, different mixes of fabrics. And you can see this here in the product details, the very bottom line. Again, looks like wool from the distance, like on the picture, but if you actually look at the composition, it's a recycling and waste nightmare, because this kind of fabrics, I will get to it, the mixed fabrics are really difficult at the downstream part of the process. Another, of course, element, another type of categories where we meet plastic is shoes, footwear, not just your beautiful neon heels. Many shoes, boots today are made out of plastic, essentially, so not leather, but some sort of mixed synthetic mix that is aimed to look like leather and feel like leather, but it is not. On the right, of course, another popular trend of the past 10 years, the sneakers, very high contents of plastics and sneakers for soles, but also for the main body of the shoe. And I wanted to add here also the point that in the middle, by adding the Louis Vuitton canvas bag, these bags are also made of not of leather. These are synthetic bags. And the fast luxury, as some people call it, fast luxury is increasingly also substituting what used to be high-end materials and craftsmanship with essentially plastic, just capitalizing on the logo. So shoes, bags, and accessories are also full of plastic. There are different kinds of plastic. They may be more related to substituting leather, for example, than fibers, but this is also something to keep in mind. And regarding shoes, there is no way, for many shoes, there is no way to recycle them. There are no recycling facilities that are on scale, because mostly because they're really difficult to disassemble. Most shoes have been designed to be worn and then thrown away, rather than be worn and then disassembled and then recycled. So for most of the shoes that exist in the world today, their end of life is going to be either in an open landfill or incinerated, but there is nothing that we can really do to recycle them at this point. I want to mention very briefly, there are also some health impacts of synthetic fibers. While pure PET, the synthetic fibers essentially have the same chemical composition as PET bottles. While essentially pure PET is not toxic to human body, what really is a problem are different sorts of dyes and chemical treatments that are used on these fabrics. And one of the more famous one recently came to the spotlight, antimony, is a type of chemical that is used as a flame retardant. And most of the time, this is a kind of treatment that polyester garments get, garments made out of polyester. And antimony is a known carcinogen, which is toxic to heart, lungs, liver, and skin. And only recently this issue has been raised to the attention of the global media and sustainable fashion community. People start to talk more about this. It's just one of many, and antimony it became known because it activates with higher temperatures. And when the person wearing, for example, sportswear, when this person sweats, the temperature of the body elevates, and it actually encourages the activates the antimony. So that's one of the more recent conversations that has been resurfacing about fashion, about synthetics in fashion and harmful effects for the health of people who wear these clothes. And finally, I just wanted to mention towards the end the challenges of mixed fabrics. I'm sure that Kirsi and Claudia are going to give a much better overview and detailed overview of these challenges. But here are the two examples, very typical. If you look at your clothes, most people, if they look at their clothes, they will find a garment or multiple garments with this kind of compositions. To the left, we have the typical mix of cotton elastan. As I mentioned, elastan is added to cotton to increase elasticity. And it's impossible to separate at the end of life. So if we want to recycle cotton into cotton, we cannot really use a 95% cotton, 5% elastan mix to be recycled, because currently there's no technology to separate the two types of fibers. Another example, which is very, very common, is the polycotton mix, 50% cotton, 50% polyester. Same problem. When we mix let's say natural origin fabrics, cellulosic fabrics, with synthetic fabrics, currently at the recycling stage, at the end of life stage, we cannot separate the fibers, which means that in practice, if we could have 100% polyester garment, technically we could melt it down and make another polyester garment. Cotton or viscose, there's also innovative, projects like the New Cotton Project that are exploring and actually piloting the ways of also chemically recycling cellulosic fabrics and fibers into similar kind of fiber. However, if we mix the two, synthetic and natural origin fabrics, they become unrecyclable at this point of life, at this point of time, which means that they need to be thrown out. They need to be, at the end of life, when they're no longer usable, they either get burnt or get thrown out in open landfills, or else. There are not so many, unfortunately, choices here. I will finish here because I know that Kirsi and Claudia have some fantastic graphs and data for you to share. Thank you very much for your attention, and I remain open for any comments.